All right, good morning, and let's go ahead and somewhat come together. Oop, sorry. No, you're all good. I'm all over the place today. Salisis. It was very well. It was. Brooke has posted all of the songs on Facebook and Instagram. Okay, the file's too big, so it's like 30 minutes, and but I mean I can maybe figure out a way. Give me a second, guys. My IT skills are on show this morning, and for whatever reason, I can't get anything to work. So, yeah, exactly right. Yeah, Jimmy and I were talking. There's that. There's that. What's that saying? The blind leading the blind. So it's not working. Can you upload it just straight on mine then, or can I? You just want me to use the other one? Use the email. So do I cut and paste? Is that what I do? All right. So how do I get it all on the same page? Save as, I'll just put it in Daniel. Well, let me just put it right here. This? Save. All right, so, yeah. All right, so file. Is that what you want me to do? Content. How do you do that? Just put map. Oh, crap. This is terrible. Map. No, it's on the top. Well, I don't know what this is. Well, it's set because it's not saved. Yeah. Go open. Okay, so pull up the Daniel file. All right, so maybe we have it working. Um, so, good morning, and glad to see y'all. Um, Announcements that are pertinent to us here at St. Paul. Ash Wednesday is coming up on the 22nd, I think, and that'll be not this Wednesday, but next Wednesday, and that's the beginning of Lent, and we'll have a service in our sanctuary after supper, so probably around 6:30ish. So do want to invite you to that. And then, of course, that begins Lent and then all the Lenten activities that take place. On Sunday mornings, John Few and Gil McBride and it begins on the 26th, so not this coming Sunday, right? Yeah, but Sunday week. They're going to start, I think it's a 6 or an 8 week study on the screw tape letters. And they're going to do it thematically, so it's not like you have to read all of them, but they're just going to kind of give some teachings around that. I think some of your Sunday school classes have already signed up. If you're interested, if you would, you don't necessarily have to sign up. We just want to make sure we have adequate seating because that'll take place in the fellowship hall right after the contemporary service. So I think that's all the announcements, other than that there are a number of people that are having procedures today, like knee surgeries and then different scopes and things of that nature just in our church community. So we do want to be mindful of that. Do y'all know of anything else announcement-wise, Jill? Mm.
Following up on what you said a couple weeks ago about keeping Ukraine in prayers, Dan and I got to go meet with the president of the Evangelical Seminary there 2 weeks ago, and it's just amazing to hear his stories. And he has been able to not be part of the military until now, and because of the humanitarian
Mm-hmm.
work he's doing, but he's part of the next mobilization.
Right.
And they are, and his wife, you're like 38, 39 years old, and his wife's going to go with him
Okay.
to fight. And because, well, it's horrifying to listen to him, but she said she'd rather fight than die. And
Yeah.
you know, that's where they're headed. And so he says, they say, when you're praying, pray for victory.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only outcome that
Right.
is good for them. Not just peace, but victory.
And I do know, I don't know if I mentioned this, I feel like everything in my brain is sort of not segmented the way it should be, so I might have a little restatement. I do know, I mean, our orphans are okay. They've been displaced, some of them into different areas where there's not as much fighting because the city now that where our 4 orphanages are located, it is starting to receive some of the normal bombing. And but they've kind of prepared for that. Uh, Thanks to the generosity of St. Paul and others, we were able to purchase generators and a number of things that have become phone charging stations. And that's really how people communicate. At the same time, places for medicine, places for water, just some of the necessities, as you would imagine, in a wartime. So that has really been a neat way that's been able to weigh out. Tammy did hear, or she did tell me last month, even the children that have aged out of our orphanages, we still stay in contact with them as much as we can in the years to come. Sometimes that's to help them with education, like secondary education and some levels of college. We're involved sometimes when they start their own families. We do know it's either 6 or 8 of our orphans have died in the conflict. So they entered the services and we're fighting. So just as you can imagine, we're a year into this now, and you know sometimes we have sort of like news fatigue, you know, because it's been going on for a year, but it's still very real and very dominant as you would imagine in their life. So to echo Jill's thoughts and words, I mean, I think any prayers along, I mean, you know, just be diligent there. Don't forget that for some, this is still their reality. And then, I mean, I don't know if y'all followed all the, the earthquakes in Turkey. I mean, that's just horrible. Brooke and I were talking about that last night. Was it 28 or 30,000 people that they know at least right now that have died? I mean, that would be on a level that would be almost, if this was in America, I mean, it would be totally different, right? So just be mindful that, what that situation looks like in the world as well. So just a lot of things going on. Then the Middle East, I mean, there's some stuff going on in Israel that it's a lot of unrest there. And so with some reforms and just a lot of things that seem to be, and aliens. We have aliens now, right? So, I mean, yeah, so, no, it's aliens. I mean, it's not, it's I don't know if y'all been following that. So I guess E.T. has finally made it. So he'll be here tomorrow. Buy your Reese's Pieces, and we'll all be ready to go. So, but on internet, that I don't know there, so I'll have to investigate. I unfortunately was not here either, and so we were coming back from Nashville. So said that the internet, our St. Paul's live stream was maybe struggling, and that could have been on the, it could have been on our end, or it could have been on somebody else's end. So I mean, we don't know until we. Yeah, so that's a good second. Right. Yeah, that's what Jill was saying. Yeah. So, but I mean, it's interesting all the way around. So, but I don't know if it was what was the cause of it. And I mean, sometimes it's on our end we did something wrong. Sometimes it's the internet itself. Sometimes it's on the receiving end. Yes.
Can we get Tammy Reynolds to give us an update?
Yeah, I'll ask her. I mean, because she's in contact with them daily, or as much as she can. I mean, they normally have like a morning conversation with 2 or 3 people, and to the ability that we can, considering the circumstances that they're in. So, but yeah, I'll ask Tammy for that. All right. Any others? All good? Any announcements for our community we need to be mindful of? So if you're at home, Betty Hipp sent an email to you, hopefully. That's an opportunity for you to add to our prayer list. Here inside this room, we pass a pad, and so sometime today, Betty will compile the list, and we'll send it back out tomorrow. So just be mindful of those. And then for whatever level you want to share a prayer request, that just stays with our group here. All right, we're all good? Well, let's pray and we'll begin. Oh God, again, as we gather in your name for this, we are grateful. What we pray, Lord, is that you would watch over us, and in a way that we can be mindful of the burdens and the different topics and people that we've mentioned already. We want to constantly have them in our minds and to some degree as an act of prayer. But then at the same time, if there's a way that we could segment it for a time of study, so that in the process of looking at the Scriptures through the addition of your Spirit, somehow that aids to the coming of your kingdom, then that's what we pray for. So guide us and direct us. We want to be open with our minds and our hearts in hopes that it would be an applied style of learning, so that through all this, whether it be the fellowship, whether it be the study, whether it be the reflections, the prayers, somehow that leads to a continual transformation of our life, so that we look and act as much as Jesus as possible. So guide us and direct us, we pray, and we pray this in your name. Amen. All right, so we've, again, just a little recap. Daniel's divided into 2 major sections. The first part of Daniel, which runs up to chapter 6, are what we call the historical parts. That's more of Daniel and some of the people that were deported, what it was like for them living first in the Babylonian Empire for a number of years. And that's, time-wise, that's the majority of the book. And then there's a brief part right at the very end where the Persians conquer the Babylonians. And so Daniel finished the latter part of his life under Persian rule. Now, also under Persian rule, Do y'all have your feedback? Okay. So also in the Persian rule, either Darius or Cyrus, that could be the same person. One of them is a Mede name. The other one is a Persian name. There is a decree that goes out throughout the empire, and from that, the Jews are able to return home, or the Israelites are able to return home. And some of them do, some of them don't. Daniel does not. Daniel dies in Babylon or in Persia. And so the first 6 chapters are really about that. Now, chapter 7, the book 7 through 12 is the second half of the book, and that deals with visions. And so the style of the writing is different. Chapters 1 through 6, more historicals, kind of like what you read with the Kings, the Samuels, the Chronicles. The second half of the book is more in line with certain parts of, say, Ezekiel, and definitely sounds a lot like the book of Revelation. It's an apocalyptic style of writing, that style of genre, where what's stressed is God's sovereignty. Often the writing deals with a time of persecution, and it's to be a form of encouragement. So those are the 3 tenets of apocalyptic writing. Now, the struggle is that the language often is symbolic, and the issue of time is hard to define. So there's a lot of debate inside of biblical scholars when it comes to those 2 issues. Is it literal? Is it more symbolic? And then what time period is the writer referring to? Another characteristic of apocalyptic style of writing is that it often involves angels or angelic beings. And you see that obviously in the book of Daniel. If you were to fast forward over into the book of Revelation, you find the same thing. And again, all of that is seen as a means of encouragement either to the writer or to the original audience or to believers going forward. But parsing that is a little difficult. In Daniel, and those visions, 7 and 8 are fairly straightforward. When we get to 9, it's harder. Chapter 9 is harder, really because of the last probably 6 verses of that chapter. Because we don't know if that's talking about a certain king or if that's talking about Antichrist, as in just anybody that fits that resume, or if it's talking about Antichrist in the future. But that seems to be where there's disagreement with the book of Daniel. Now, saying all that, we now move into chapter 10. And chapter 10, chapter 11, and chapter 12 are all part of the same thought. And chapter 10 is preparation for the final vision, which is all of chapter 11. And then chapter 12 is a postscript or a conversation with the angels of chapter 10. There's Daniel's is now talking back to the angels, which is where you see this idea of encouragement. But 10, 11, and 12 are all part of the same vision, are all part of the same experience, same conversation. They're held together. And 10, and we're going to get into 10 today, you have to tell me, and I want to be sensitive to this because you might have Daniel fatigue, all right? You know what I mean? So, 10 is interesting because it brings up this whole idea of what's the role of angels in the life of people. I mean, is there a role, is there interaction and things of that nature? And again, the house is going to be split. Some's going to take this more literal. Some is going to take it more symbolic, which is okay. When we get to chapter 11, what's great about chapter 11 is that if you take history and lay it up against chapter 11, it's spot on. But it covers a couple of hundred years. And it is two empires that are fighting back and forth. So you need to tell me how deep in the weeds you want to go. All right? Because it's like taking a world history class at 8 in the morning. You know, for about the first 10 minutes, you're all good. And then about the time when your blood pressure sort of calms down because you were running the class and you finally sit in the desk and you're like, ooh, I got to take a nap. That's what it's going to feel like. So we can go through this and I can hit kind of the high marks, which is I'm going to do today. And if that's fine, then, you know, we can bypass 11 and move on into 12. But 12 is going to be a little bit like 10. So my point is this. We can take 3 to 4 weeks and go through it, or we can take maybe a week or two and then we'll be finished with the book. So we'll go through 10. You sleep on it, you let me know, but we might wrap it all up next week, if that's good with y'all. Which then we can move on to something else. So I know we mentioned, I think, Malachi or something. That was just my suggestion, just because we'll be up against a little bit of a time crunch before we break, because we'll have some, you have like a spring break, you have a Holy Week, you know, so we don't have a ton of weeks. Or we can pick up something that's might be a little more joyful, you know. So maybe we need a palate cleanser and maybe move into something like maybe the 7 I am statements of Jesus or something. That might be something to do. Or the 7 last words of Jesus, something like that. And we can move into that since we'll be pretty close to Lent. All right? So if you have any thoughts, you can just let me know either at break or whatever. We can go from there. But I do want to look at chapter 10 because this is fairly interesting. So the map on the screen is chapter 11. Just to kind of give you an idea, because what you'll have, and you'll see this part when we get into 11, and we know a little bit about this. So this is the Persian Empire under Xerxes, Cyrus, all of them. And the Persian Empire goes on for a couple hundred years. Persia makes a big mistake under Xerxes because they begin to attack Greece. And, you know, that's well documented in history. But out of that comes Philip of Macedonia, who is a general, a Greek general. And he sort of unites a number of the different Greek empires or Greek areas, and they begin to launch a counter attack against the Persians. Well, Philip dies early, which sets the stage for his son. Now, his son is Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great, in the span of about 15 years, I think, it's either 10 or 12 or 15 years, will push the Persians all the way back and eventually conquers the Persian Empire. And so under Alexander the Great, this is all now his empire at some point. And let me cut that off. So, and that's, again, we've looked at that in chapter 7, chapter 8. We're going to see it again as part of this vision. And the struggle is that Alexander the Great dies young right after he conquers everybody, or at least the Persians. And so and this is in chapter 11, so then his 4 major generals divide his empire. And chapter 11 deals with 2 of them. And the reason why is because the one in the south, Ptolemy was the general, begins up fighting, what is that? Where is he at? Seleucus. And their descendants fight for about 100 and something years. And the battleground, as you can imagine, takes place a great deal right here. Well, what's right here? Israel. Which is why, for Daniel, this is important. And chapter 11 is how these 2 generals and all their leadership descendants fight each other. Well, eventually there's a guy, Antiochus IV, who we've known before. We find him in 8 and chapter 9. He is the one that eventually puts an end to these people. And so he then rules all of this for a brief period of time. And he's just brutal. And again, we've looked at that. And so part of chapter 11, I've given you the verses. 1 and 4 deal with Alexander the Great and the generals. 5 through 20 just deals with about 150 years of different generals, north and south, fighting each other. But then when you get to 21 and 35, the vision zeroes in on Antiochus. And then at the very end of chapter 11, and this is where it becomes a little bit of a struggle, we have some things that don't match up in the vision to the history or what we know from history about Antiochus. So what some biblical scholars would ask, as would we, would be is, okay, who now are we talking about? Is this just where the vision is going into more detail and symbolic language here? Or is it talking about someone that fits the bill that would be like an anti-person of God? Or are we talking about the Antichrist, way off in the future? And for 9 verses, there's just some vision language that we don't know. So if you're tracking time-wise, you go from Alexander the Great to Antiochus, which is about 160-something BC. And then all of a sudden it starts talking about this Antichrist-type figure. So we don't know if that's if the vision has moved into the immediate future, or if we're looking at something, say, in the Roman Empire, or if we're looking at something way off into the future, which has been a little bit of the struggle for us in these different visions, right? This is not the first time we've had to deal with that time issue. Well, as soon as this person is off the scene, we move into chapter 12, where Daniel re-engages the angel. Gabriel would be part of it. Michael's mentioned. And then for 12 verses, it's all about Daniel being encouraged. Now, we also know from history, around 168, 169, which is about the time of this guy, that's where you also have the beginning of the Maccabees. And so the Maccabees are, from 168, there's a major revolt where they push the Syrians out, and then through their lineage, eventually you get to Herod the Great. They're right here. Well, they're not on the map. What they do is this becomes, eventually they're destroyed or they're captured by but there's a period in time when the Maccabees push back the Syrians, because eventually the Syrians under Antiochus will sort of be all this area right here. And there are 2 other generals, one's here, one's there, but the ones here are the ones that really, that's these 2 people. After Antiochus is defeated, he basically goes and mourns himself to death. It's kind of like his image is he's shocked by that, and he ends up dying. We have about 9 verses. We really don't know who it's talking about. But from history, we know of this group that takes advantage of Antiochus losing, and they push them out of Israel. And so there's a brief period in time where Israel's somewhat free, within reason, until the Romans step in. And then the Romans actually overtake the Maccabees, and they squash their revolt. But eventually Herod is not really part of the family. He marries into the family, but he's fairly ruthless. And so the Romans set him up as a puppet ruler. And that's what we have when we get to the Gospels. But there's a number of generations, from there to there. So now, the Maccabees aren't necessarily mentioned in the vision, but we know from history that what took place in Israel, this area, but it fits, even though they're not mentioned, it fits with what's going on. All right, so that, again, but you've got to go, this is a couple of centuries. All right? So that's the reason why I said in the beginning, when we get to chapter 11, if you're okay with this, what we just talked about, I'm okay with that too. Because all it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, Ptolemies, next general after Ptolemy is dead is Ptolemy the second. He fights this guy from this side, and this guy wins for a while. Then all of a sudden, it's like 20 years later, this guy will win, and it's kind of soap opera-ish, right? And what's really interesting is that you could take this symbolic language from the vision, and you can match it up over this 100 years, and it kind of checks out. I mean, this of all the visions of Daniel, this one is like spot on when it lines up to history. It just covers a lot of history, and you can get into the weeds as much as you want, but it changes at 36 because then it's not matched up to a historical person. But we don't know how far in the future, Daniel is going. So, anyway, that's a little bit of the rub. So let's look at 10, and then at the end of the day, you'll find out if you're good with 11, and then we'll just maybe next week do 12, and we will put Daniel out in the pasture. All right? All good? Y'all good at home? Hope so. All right, so let's do this. If somebody would read, let's go with, Daniel 1 to, Daniel 1 through 9. That'll just kind of give us a little bit of what's going on. 10 verses 1 through 9. All right.
The third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, revelation was given to Daniel, who was called Belshazzar. Its message was true, and its concern a great war. The understanding of the message came to him in a vision. At that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice foods, no meat or wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over. On the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, the Tigris, I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen, with a belt of the finest gold around his waist. His body was like crystallite, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision. The men with me did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone, gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deadly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking, and as I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground.
All right, so we have at least the beginning of some introduction of what's going on. So this is probably about the time of the lion's den. We do get an idea about when these visions took place in Daniel's life, because whether it be chapter 7, 8, or 9, and we see this in 10, Daniel does date them by who's the king. And so we know that within the 3rd year of Cyrus, or Darius, the king of Persia, that Daniel received this vision. This is also, give or take a year, probably after the decree that Cyrus signed or made to allow Jews to return back to Israel. So we do know from history there are some things going on, and we also know from other books of the Bible in the Old Testament that when those returning from home got back home, it wasn't hunky-dory. And so there were some things that were at odds. There was struggles and around wanting to rebuild the temple, wanting to reestablish the wall. That's part of that's Ezra and the worship. Part of that is Nehemiah and rebuilding the wall. We do also know that the Samaritans who were wiped out ages before are not oppressing the southern kingdom, but they're definitely standing in opposition to rebuilding the wall or rebuilding the temple. So you can imagine that some of that, at least word or information, made it back to Daniel. And so Daniel is obviously in a state of prayer. Daniel's in a state of concern of what's going on. It's probably close to Passover time because he's out he's in a time of prayer. He's in a time of mourning and fasting. We can get an idea about what's going on in the life of Daniel. But he gets this insight into this great conflict or this great war or great struggle, depending on what version of the Bible that you have, that's about to take place. And again, from chapter 11, we know what it is, at least a pretty good understanding of what it is. But at this time, Daniel doesn't know. But we do have an introduction of some different characters. We do know that Daniel's standing beside the river. This is not the first time he's been by the river, but he sees this spiritual being, and the spiritual being is, how is he described in appearance? Just very, very similar to something in Revelation. So if you were to take this and you were to compare this to, say, Revelation 1 and 2, you get a similar description. Hair a certain way, appearance, either in a robe or, and not just in the robe, but the way Daniel is comparing the person is that it's pretty fantastic. So much so that when Daniel witnessed the being, what does Daniel do? Yeah, he becomes weak. Maybe he passes out. Weak at the knees, things of that nature. And this is on the heels of 3 weeks of fasting and praying. So it's not just he says, all right, dear Lord, and immediately, he sees it. He's been in a state of prayer or in a state of purifying himself, things of that nature, for at least 3 weeks. And at some point near the end of those 3 weeks, all of a sudden he witnessed this one person. Eventually, it's going to be 2, and or maybe even more. We'll eventually get to that. But I do want to say a bit about fasting. Fasting in the Old Testament was somewhat of a regular practice. In the New Testament, it is practiced some, but eventually it gets mixed in with legalism. And so there's sort of a move away from it. Once a year, the Day of the Atonement, obviously in the Old Testament, Israelites or Jews would fast for certain reasons. And so that would continue. Often fasting is associated with the people when there is some level of struggle in the Bible. So Old Testament, New Testament, people would fast for either clarity, they would fast for some level of direction, and perhaps this is what Daniel is doing here. He's troubled. Maybe he's heard word back that Israel, the people returning, it's not well there. So again, he's not fasting because of the vision. He hadn't received the vision yet. He's fasting just in a normal practice or for some other reason. But in this state, he receives then a vision, and from someone who is not normal looking. He does look like a man or a human to some degree, and that might just be attributes, head, arms, legs, things of that nature. But the way the man is dressed, at least the wording that's associated with the person or the being's dress is different than other times when Daniel would describe a person. And so much so, also when he saw the person or he witnessed the person, his strength was... maybe his strength was diminished for whatever reason, but the the being seeks to reestablish his strength, right? So that's verse, like 8. No strength was left in me. Then I heard the sound of his voice, this is verse 9. As I heard the sound of his words, I fell on my face in deep sleep, my face to the ground. And then verse 10, which we haven't read, says, behold, the hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. So obviously that Daniel witnessed the being, and from that maybe passed out or at least humbled, prostrated himself down. And then what happens next is that he, some degrees, reestablished. All right? So let me stop and sort of open it up just to see if there's something that is sort of questionable in the text, or something that you noticed that is sort of an aha, because it's a little. Now he's getting into vision mode. We don't know. I mean, it's just, but within. So we do know that Daniel, Cyrus is king, or Darius, and there's some interplay in his court about maybe some jealousy, what have you. But it's early on in his reign that they're building this statue, which is not uncommon for a new king. Once he, especially since he defeated the Babylonians, to erect some level of a statue in his name, his honor. Well, so it's early on in that. So we don't know if this came before or came after. They're just all in the beginning part of Daniel's relationship with Cyrus, but within probably 3 or so years. But we don't know exactly when, as which one came first. What's your guess? Before. All right, we'll go with before. So Sandy has spoken. This took place before the lion. Now, is that lion's den before the vision, or vision before the lion's den? All right, so this is before Daniel was in the lion's den. So the reward for Daniel having this vision, he's chunked in the lion's den. All right, so note to self. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, keep the visions to yourself, right? So now, what's interesting is that we do have this one person. Who is this guy? Yeah, so, who is it? Is it, it's... So we have on the table, is he God? Is he an angel? Was he Gabriel? All right, so, we're going to keep reading. Yeah, so Gabriel has been the one that he's been in contact with, at least in some form or fashion. One of the things that is interesting is that Daniel's response to this one is a little different than Daniel's response to some of the other angels. The language here is that this is, you don't really get Daniel. There is one time where Daniel, in one of the previous visions, an angel comes and Daniel does sort of bow, or does, and the angel says, no, don't do that to me. This is the wrong person. You don't do that to me, you do it to somebody else. So there's a little bit of this, but we don't know for sure. What's often debated in among scholars is that it's either maybe not so much God, although there are some that would say this is God, or Jesus. This is like an Old Testament manifestation of Jesus. We don't know for sure, or at some level of an angel. As we continue to work through chapter 10, what we're going to discover is that there are multiple beings. So is it multiple angels, or is it one who travels with an entourage? So just kind of hang on to it. So we're going to put a pin in it. We're not going to answer 100% who it is. But obviously, when Daniel, if we've got a scale and you've got this one person this one being, and you've got Daniel, it's heavily weighted where they're not equal. So regardless of who we think this person is, this person is of a different place than Daniel. Is that fair? All right. So let's just for right now, we're just going to go with that. All right, because we don't know 100% who it is. But we also know that the only person who does everybody see this? Only Daniel. Now, the other people that are around Daniel they acknowledge that something's taken place, but they don't see what Daniel sees. Now, where in the New Testament, where is something like this in the New Testament? I'm testing your New Testament. Book of Acts, around chapter 8 or 9 or 11, somewhere in that neighborhood. Well, that's, you know what? Well done, you, right? So, I mean, you picked out another one. Balaam's donkey, right? So, in New Testament, where has there been one person who sees angelic being or someone that would fit in that realm, and the people that are around him don't see it, but they do know something's happening? Bingo. Who said it? Paul. Absolutely. So Paul on the Damascus Road, he's traveling with a group of people. Daniel's with a group of people. Paul engages Jesus from the text that we have in Acts. The other people know that something's going on, but they don't engage the same way that Paul does. Very similar here. Daniel is engaging, or this person is engaging Daniel, and the other people are aware that something's taking place. They're just sort of outside. They're not even outside looking in. They can hear the stadium from a mile away. That's really what's going on. All right? So look at the time. All right, so let's do this. Let's go, someone read 10 to 14, and then we'll talk about that and take a little break. Yeah, all right. So we get a little bit more insight that obviously this person has knowledge that he's about to expound on to Daniel. In the previous visions, that was Gabriel. Now, also in the previous visions, he's named. We have it in the text. So I lean into this as Gabriel talking because that would be consistent with the previous chapters. So one of the things that we would have to ask is that, and Gabriel, what we know from other, from the book of Daniel and from other books of the Bible, that whenever Gabriel is mentioned, he is a giver of knowledge from, say, heavenly things or future things to a certain person. Right? Think of the Gospels, right? So interaction with Mary, interaction with Joseph, interaction with Zechariah. So, again, we don't know for sure, right? Because at least for right now, the name's not mentioned. But I think the consistency or the context of the book we would feel pretty comfortable with landing on Gabriel. But, we hold it loosely, right? So it's a little bit of an asterisk. It says, well, it could be because the name is not mentioned, but someone else's name is mentioned. Now for the first time. Michael. And Michael is sort of, he's sort of dispatched. And all of this was to happen, or at least there's a time from the time of Gabriel or whoever the speaker is, and Michael. There's one aspect of we're sent, right, to give knowledge or to give you some understanding about this vision that you're about to have, or about to, we're going to help explain some things about the future events. And we have this one Michael, who was also part of the deal. And what's Michael's job? At least we might conclude from what we know. Yeah, someone said it sounds military. It sounds like he's a warrior, or at least something along those lines. Now, this is where it's going to get, and there's a good, I don't know what the Greek word is, but in the English equivalent is it's about to get really juicy. It's about to get really juicy. Yeah, so because what you're going to find is that not in a great deal of description, but at least from the context, that this angel's presence, maybe plus Michael, right, somehow has got some interplay with whoever this is, who is not named. So this is he who must not be named. Is that it? Is that the Harry Potter reference, right? It's not Voldemort. Isn't that's the guy's name, right? Yeah, Voldemort. I'm making a joke. I mean, this is a Harry Potter reference. I think it's Harry Potter. Right? It is Harry Potter, right? Okay. But we have this introduction, at least now, of this one called the Prince of the Kingdom of Persia. Now, that's the ruling kingdom. Oh, come on, Shane. That's all of this area right here. Not this yet, but right here. And this is the big empire of the day at the time of this vision. And Cyrus, and then there's a couple other kings. Eventually it's Xerxes, who's like the last big king. After Xerxes, you have the beginning of, some of the pushback, which eventually will lead to Alexander the Great. But you have this introduction, who we have no idea who this is, other than he's the prince of the kingdom of Persia or the Persian kingdom. But, and this is where you get to have a little thought before break, out of these few verses comes this whole, leg of theological discussion about what is the interplay between angelic or spiritual beings, both on the good side and the bad side, and the interplay with human beings. So, take a break, sit on it for about 10 minutes, and you can come back and tell me what the answer is. Do you understand the question? To what level does the spiritual world engage with the temporal or the physical world? All right? So take a break, 10 minutes, get something to eat and drink, and we'll reconvene. All right, let's go ahead and we'll come back and just to sort of have some comments around this whole interplay. All right, so we've got this, again, we've got this introduction of different people. One is named, we think is Gabriel, which I think context gives us a pretty good clue there. That's the one who is dispensing the information, which would be in line with other books of the Bible and either other chapters in the book of Daniel where that angelic being's task was to give information, either in the form of interpretation or normally interpretation of future events. What's different about chapter 10 is we have the introduction of this next angelic being who also has a name, Michael. And those are, I think, the only two angels that are mentioned in the Bible, Gabriel and Michael. That's it. The other times angels are mentioned in the Bible, it does say an angel or an angel of the Lord or something like that. But these are the ones who actually have a name. And so outside of the Gospels, you have it in Daniel, and I think you have it in Revelation, but that's it. Just when it comes to naming of different angelic beings. There is a difference between Gabriel's job description and Michael's job description. So obviously Gabriel, the assumption is that Gabriel's in the text. I'm just going to use his name, even though he's not mentioned. When Gabriel has been mentioned in other chapters, I think chapter 8 for sure, maybe, I don't think 7, but maybe 9. But then, we're assuming again here in chapter 10, he does come with giving insight into whatever's going to happen. Michael's task, or at least his resume, has more to do with what someone said military, fighting, combat, warrior type status. So, he's introduced in chapter 10. Well, I'll take that back. Michael also shows up in Jude verse 9, and then Revelation chapter 12. So it's 3 books of the Bible that Michael's mentioned. I think maybe 2 or 3 books of the Bible that Gabriel's mentioned. Some of those are in the Gospel. In Jude 9, Michael is called an archangel, or at least some level of a chief angel, or the first angel. And again, according to Daniel 10, verse 21, Michael has been assigned by God as the watcher or the caretaker of Israel, or God's people. Now, it's God's people, but for Daniel, that means Israel. All right? So whether or not that's God's people going forward, we don't know, because Daniel only would envision God's people being Israel. All right? So we have to stay within Daniel's realm of thought. What we do know about Michael is that obviously he's powerful. He's got some level of protective aspect to him, and that at least the assumption from the text is that when Gabriel is sent, if it wasn't for Michael, or at least Gabriel being sent and Gabriel's arrival took some time, 21 days, which just happens to be the same time that Daniel is fasting and praying. And without Michael's presence, we can assume that it would have taken longer, right? Because there's this prince of Persia, or prince of the kingdom of Persia, who we don't know who that is. But there's an assumption that he is of... So when I say angelic, I don't want you to think just angels, right? He at least is in some form, the assumption is the prince of the kingdom of Persia is angelic as well, or at least spiritual, heavenly as well, non-human, or at least that's the assumption, and that for whatever reason, this individual or being has some level of power too. Do you think that's a fair assessment? I'm asking.
I'm shocked because I thought the Prince of Persia was opposing Gabriel and Michael.
That's what I was just describing.
Okay, but I thought you said he was angelic.
So when I say angelic, I don't want you to just think angels. So heavenly, spiritual, non-human, non-temporal. So whatever word you want to use to, spiritual world, human world. Let's use those concepts. So Gabriel, Michael, Prince of Kingdom of Persia fit here. Daniel fits here. Right? Is that fair? Safe? All right. It would seem, again from the context, two are good, one is not. Correct? So, to use classical language, two angels, one not an angel, which would be. Is that fair? So the question is the demon the prince of the Persian kingdom? Well, process of elimination. Now, we don't have the word demon. I'm putting demon on the board. We don't have any description of the prince of the kingdom of Persia other than that being, context, we can assume spiritual world, and context, that being works against the speaker, which I'm saying is Gabriel, and Michael, who's mentioned in the passage. That's all we do know. Now, classical Christian teaching would say if it's not an angel and you're a spiritual being, what are you? Right, so that's why I put demon on the board. But Daniel, that word is not in the book of Daniel. All right, so we don't get that word until we get to the New Testament, I think. I'm going off memory there. But we just know that two are good. One, the assumption is they're not. We both, safe context, spiritual world. So if it's not the two that are good, that we would say our terminology, angels, then whatever the other word for those that are in contest with angels, that's where this prince of the kingdom of Persia fits. Easy word would be fallen angel, demon, but we don't get that from Daniel, all right? So again, we're bringing in stuff that at least from greater Christian thought, and we're trying to make some headway of the book of Daniel. Now, again, this is why apocalyptic literature is so difficult to interpret. Because if you stay within the confines of the passage, then you have to be comfortable with unanswered questions. Could be. All right, so if you're at home, one of the comments is, could this person be the Antichrist? Could be. Definitely would fit what we know from previous chapters about a person that fits the bill of something opposite of God, because the context of here is that whoever this person is working against what God is at least trying to do with Daniel, which is give interpretation. And from the angel's own mouth, or at least the speaker's own mouth, again, I'm assuming it's Gabriel, that the answer from God was sent day one, or at least the moment Daniel said amen. Again, I'm make a conclusion from the passage. But it took 21 days, or a period of time, before the message actually got to Daniel. So one of the questions that we have to ask then is, why the delay? Was that because they're having a wrestling match, and eventually Michael, pins him or kicks him out of the ring, and so Gabriel's able to have safe passage in to talk to Daniel? All right, could be. Or could it be that Daniel continued to pray, and from that sort of like how a human might engage, because what we do know from the Bible is there is some connection between these. Yeah, it's in the Gospels.
So could the prince of Persia be a person? And how long can that demonic possession last?
We have no idea. So again, you're asking questions that we just don't know. Because now you're getting into the realm where of say like possessions or things of that nature. Because what we don't have, the only reason we know that somehow it's related to Persia is one, Persia is mentioned, and Persia is the ruler, the big ruler of Daniel's day right now. So, I mean, if the vision would have been given back in Nebuchadnezzar, it might have said the Babylonian Empire. I'm speculating. Okay? So we don't know, again, there's a lot of things that we don't know, and we have to take what the scriptures say and realize that from that, we might then conclude 4 or 5 different possibilities. And then from there, we look at each possibility and see which one is most probable. That's called interpretation. But in this particular case, it is not as easy because we just don't have a ton of information. So, couple of conclusions that people have drawn is that one possibility is Daniel's prayers or faithfulness in prayer did aid this. I don't agree. All right, let me tell you why. I'm just saying that's a possibility, okay? And the reason why is because throughout all, again, I'm just drawing this straight from the book of Daniel. Now, there might be other scriptures where I would agree with this, just not buying it here. Because what is foremost, the number one theological takeaway from the book of Daniel is who's in control. Go ahead, you can say it, Beth. Don't be afraid. Welcome in, come on in. God. And from chapter 1 throughout the entire book, there's nothing that takes place inside the book of Daniel that is not at God's own hand. And from previous chapters in the book of Daniel, even the rising and falling of empires are all at God's hand. And that's been proven. Go back to look at the historicals. Daniel's rise to power in chapter 1. Why? All at God's hand. Daniel was faithful, God's hand. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, saved from the fiery furnace. Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel receiving insight into Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, or all those things. Every last bit of it from the book of Daniel has been completely because God has allowed this and has given this. So, the delay, we could say, well, maybe God just allowed that to take place, maybe because he wanted to see a wrestling match. Okay, I don't buy that either, but that could be a possibility. Or it could be that to assume an anthropomorphic understanding that humans can project out, right, into spiritual world, that does exist in other scriptures. It just doesn't mesh well with the general theme of the book of Daniel. So whatever their delay, we don't know, we just know there was a delay. To say that it was strictly that the Michael and Gabriel would not have made it to Daniel had not Daniel prayed, I just want to go, well, that's a possibility. It's just not maybe the probability. It does exist within the realm of possibility. I think there just might be other explanations. The struggle is just we don't get the answer. Now, does that mean you shouldn't pray? I mean, no. Again, if you just take nothing but Daniel and that's all you're going to look at, I think you just have to be careful with that conclusion. There are other top parts in the Bible, particularly Jesus' teaching in the Gospels, that, yeah, you should pray. And Jesus talks about that. But so when you read the Gospels and one parable says this, and another parable might say something else that sounds similar, do you just take one parable and just put it on the other parable and say, it doesn't matter, this one parable is everything? No. So again, you stay within the realm of the information that you have. So to take Paul's writings or Jesus' writings or Peter's writing or John's writing and then superimpose that on the book of Daniel and say, this is what's going on. Well, they didn't write this book. And so we have to stay within first Daniel's thought. And in Daniel's thought, there isn't a single thing that doesn't happen outside of the hand of God. Even rulers, kingdoms, they're all for a purpose of God's own deciding. So why would that change here? That's all I'm asking. So for me, to say that the Prince of Persia was about to pin Michael and Gabriel, had it not been for Daniel, that might be somebody wanting to pump up Daniel and maybe use that to teach. I just don't think in interpretation that's the best interpretation. We don't really know. There was a 21-day delay. Eventually it works. That still talks about the sovereignty of God. They were able to give insight into Daniel, which we will have in verse 11. And then when we get to verse 12, Michael enters back on into the scene. So the question that says, why did it take so long? Not 100% sure. A larger question that shows up from this passage is there such a thing as spiritual world beings who are assigned geographies, both on the good and bad side? Maybe. Because it does say that Michael is assigned to the people of God. Inside the book of Daniel, that would be Israel. Not people of God always. Because we're staying within the book of Daniel. Now that might be, and Daniel only knew from his own experience, but at least from the book of Daniel, it's assigned to some level Israel. Or in this case, Jews. Now, your guess is as good as mine if that is true. I have no idea. And, but it's a possibility because there could be at least spiritual world person that is not angel. So if you'll grant me the word demon, who is associated here, whether or not that is an actual possession of a person or whether or not this is like this is not that I planned it this way, but the whole wormwood and screw tape has that type of concept, right? That's C.S. Lewis is writing with that like a concept that you've got you're private demons, but then eventually you get to like a major demon or a general demon. In this case, screw tape is writing to wormwood, where you got like a general in the demon army writing to a private, about how he should do his job. Is that what's going on here? Maybe. We just don't know. So again, now, but out of this, if you were to pick up different commentaries, you're going to find people who go off all the way out into all types of possibilities of that. There are angels who are assigned to different areas, and there are angels who are assigned to different people. And at the same time, there are demons who are assigned to certain areas, and demons who are assigned to certain people. And so the spiritual world is controlling the physical world. That's a conclusion. I don't buy it. But that's there. That's not where I lean. What you have to be comfortable with is that there is a spiritual world. There is also what I would call a human world or a temporal world. And the veil between the two is not as concrete as we want, or maybe, it's permeable. But how the interplay takes place, especially from the spiritual side to the human side, we don't get a lot of information in the Bible, other than the fact that it happens. But does it happen all the time? That's one of the questions I'm going to ask God, because I don't know. But what we do know is that they both can affect each other in some form or fashion. The whole concept of the incarnation is God breaking into this world for a certain purpose, redemption. What we know, particularly when we do a funeral, and we really talk about those passages where the human world then is able to affect or to live in the spiritual world, Well, Paul writes about that. Death is swallowed up in victory. The veil between the two is fairly thin. But just what we don't have is the information that we would probably want of how and how often. Don't know. But there are all types of theologies that, I mean, there was this one, when I was in seminary, what was this guy's name? He was out at Fuller Seminary out in California. He had this whole thought, it's Peter something, this whole thought of how, their church growth was tied to angelic beings and, and they sort of geographically linked and whatnot. And then, and then the whole opposite side of that as well. I mean, he worked it out in his mind. And there was this one author that I remember reading his books a lot when I was in high school and college because they were, for a boy, it's battling and stuff like that. I was like, oh yeah, I can read this. But it was Piercing the Darkness, I think was one of them. Frank Peretti, I think. I can't believe I remember his name. But he had created this whole lineage and hierarchy of angelic world and demon world. And he great writer in description for boys. It's like battling swords and stuff like that. And man, they were just going at it left and right. I'd be reading that thing every book that came out. I was reading, it reminded me of like Army. And the fact that I was reading something I thought was, Christian, I think it is, right? So, I mean, it's like, hey, I'm, kind of killing two birds with one stone. But we just don't know the interplay. And, I hate to say we just don't know, but we just don't, it doesn't give us the insight that we would want. And so it's okay to speculate, and it's okay to see how Daniel fits inside of other prophets. Remember, that's the style. Or Daniel fits inside of other genres of writing that are similar, and then we want to kind of see that inside of the Old Testament. I'm just talking about how we interpret. You stay within the book, and then from there you go to other styles of writing that are similar, because you might get some insight in there. Stay within the Testament, then stay within the whole Bible, then stay within the whole of Christian thought. So when we don't get all the information that we have from this immediate text, then we look at the larger scope of Daniel. Maybe we get something else from other parts, other chapters. If we don't get the answer that we want, then maybe we go into other prophets or other, apocalyptic style of writings. And then if we, still don't have the answer, maybe it's unclear, then we just might want to look at Old Testament and New Testament. And then if that doesn't work, then we look at how the church has interpreted this throughout the ages. But I'm just going to tell you, you're going to find parts in the Bible that just we don't have the clarity that we want. And that doesn't mean that the Bible is not authoritative. It doesn't mean that the Bible is not useful for teaching and maturation of faith. It is. It just doesn't define everything the way that we want it. And that's okay. When you were talking to your children or your grandchildren, and they ask a question, sometimes your answer is just one word. And then you get what type of response from your children or grandchildren? But why, Mimi? But why, KK? But why? And and sometimes you give explanations, sometimes you don't. And so there are some things that the Bible, at least the original writer and the original audience, they might have known. And we're just late to the party. So that's the struggle with the book of Daniel. But what we do have is that this introduction of different beings, people, and we don't know 100% who they are. We do have another name. And from that, this person comes, now 2 against 1. That's the assumption. And this side prevails, and they are able to give chapter 11 in this vision about what is to come. And it describes a great conflict, or a great battle, or great struggle. From history, it matches up pretty spot on with this time period from Alexander the Great down to Antiochus. This last little bit we don't know. I think it's okay. You can put Antichrist or an Antichrist type person. Whether or not it's the or an, we don't know. But that's what we got. So, one of the questions to come out of this is, spiritual warfare. There are, again, a number of people who sort of move in and delve, into that a great deal. Some denominations are very much involved with that. Some are not. But there's just not a ton of scriptures on it. And then the scriptures that we get, sometimes they're not as definitive as in their description as what we would want. And so you see that mostly from different church, from church history and insight there. I mean, if there are angelic or demonic beings who control areas, again, remember the sovereignty of God. That's the whole, thrust of Daniel's book. And what you find in the Gospels is that the strong man in that parable, right, was that Luke chapter 2, I think? The strong man, what does Jesus say? Strong man comes into the house, but there's one who comes and binds the strong man. So the strong man is the devil, Satan, something that would be opposite of God's side. And Jesus describes himself as one who is able to come and bind even the strong man so that the captives can be set free. Now, how does that work? What's the interplay behind all that? Your guess is as good as mine. It's in my experience, if you look for God, you're going to see God. If you look for the devil, you'll find the devil too. So I'd advise you to do the former. All right, so, again, I'm not trying, it'd be great if I could just tell you, one-to-one, but, I'd be telling you what Shane thinks more so than what I think the Bible's trying to say. All right? How about that for Valentine's Day? So the question is, are there some things that we either won't understand or can understand or are not meant to understand? I think that's a reality. One of the things that is clear in the Gospels and also in the book of Daniel is that there are some mysteries that are revealed for the purpose of faith. The whole gospel, Jesus, one of the things, if you study, particularly in the Gospel of Mark, what Jesus constantly said is the kingdom of God is being revealed. And he uses that word mystery. And the idea is that when it comes to Jesus, when it comes to God's interaction, it's those things are not to be secretive because God is a self-revealing God. Now, does that mean the revelation comes to the level that we always want it? The answer to that is no. And when you read the book of Job, whether you think Job's a real or just a sort of like a story, it doesn't matter. The same conclusion you can draw from both sides is that, when Job finally gets his audience with God, what does God tell him? He sort of pulls back the heavens and basically says, all right, you want to know, big boy? Here it is. And you know how Job responds? Hey, I'm sorry. I'll stay in my lane. So, there's some things that just, for whatever reason, finite on our end, infinite on God's end, or maybe they're not to be known. That I don't know. But what you do know, stay in that. All right? That's what I mean by if you look for God, you'll find God. All right. Go in peace. Tell me about chapter 11. You can get in the weeds of this king versus that king and how this king married this person and their baby was killed, and it's just crazy.